Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Intro Bootcamp Session 2. Before we start with the content that Joe has prepared for us, we have some announcement. So, the first one, and this is the most important one, to be honest with you, Joe. At the end of today's session, I will share with you a link so you can claim the certificate of completion. That is super important for you, and I will explain how you can claim this certificate. But the best part is that this is a verifiable credential that you will be able to add to your LinkedIn profile. So during these sessions, you will learn a lot of things of how you can start building on Algorand, but also you will receive this certificate that can complement your CV. The second announcement, this is super important actually. So hold on a second. I will share my screen. The last session, we shared with you that the next week we will have our first Python beginner bootcamp. But we are changing the dates so we can improve the Python developer experience. Our engineering team is working so hard to offering you guys the best tooling for you to start building on Algorand. So the new dates is gonna be April 15 through 18. What you need to do? Nothing. If you already registered for the Python bootcamp, don't worry. You just need to connect on the dates, on the new dates, and that's all. We also are going to send an email with the new dates, but this is an important one. So please keep that in mind that we are moving the Python bootcamp 1 week. And the third announcement, this is super important for us because this is a free content and we are putting a lot of effort for offering you the best and the most updated content for developers, but we need that you help us to create FOMO. And how you can do it? You can share screenshots of these sessions on your socials, and you can tag us, and obviously the great and one and only Joe Polney. So I will share on the chat the link so you can follow us on X and you can help us to invite a lot of people to participate on our upcoming bootcamps. And the last one, and this is important because a lot of people ask, are the sessions are recorded? Yeah, the sessions are recorded, and once the session is over, you will receive the recording in your email. So we are ready. Joe, please share with us what are the things that we are going to learn today. And I don't know if I'm missing something else, Joe.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Camilo. I think that covers it all. Like Camilo said, we are going to be improving the developer experience on Python even more. So definitely register for that if you haven't already. And if you can't make the dates live, like we said, there will be a recording. So even if you're not sure if you're going to make it, definitely register so you can get access to those recordings right away. And then we'll be posting on YouTube at a later date. So today, what we're going to be covering is how to set up your development environment. So yesterday we used code spaces to first get our hands on Algorand and learn a little bit about how Algorand works and what are the features that Algorand has to offer. Today we're going to be focusing on installing AlgoKit, the Algorand developer tool, that's on your local machine. So in the future, when you build on Algorand, in particular when you're doing our boot camps that are coming up, you don't have to use code spaces. and you can use your local machine. If you are attending this session and you already have AlgoKit installed and you know everything is running locally, then you want to stick around just for a little bit, because I'll be talking a bit about things you can do in the time between the end of this session and our beginner bootcamp now 2 weeks from now. So before I get into that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish this poll here on Livestorm. Okay, and I believe everyone should be able to answer this poll. And if you don't see it in the bottom right where there's chat and questions, if you go to the polls tab, you should be able to see it if it's not coming up for you. And this is just going to help me. I'm going to go over the installation process on Windows and Mac, but I'm just going to start with whichever one is more popular. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to answer that. But while we're answering that, what applies to Windows, Mac, and Linux, we're not going to be going over Linux explicitly here, because if you're on Linux, you can probably figure out how to install all the prerequisites yourself. But the core prerequisites for AlgoKit is Docker, Python 3.12, and then we recommend using VSCode as your editor. AlgoKit also works with, at the end of the day, it's just Python, so it works with any editor, but we also have first-class support for the JetBrains IDE like PyCharm as well. But we recommend, if you're starting fresh, VSCode. And I'll get into all the details of that a bit later. But I can see here now we have around 70% of the developers here are using Windows. So when I get into development environment setup, that's what we're going to start with. But if you're on a Mac, a lot of the installation steps are the same. It's the same stuff you have to install. Just the steps to do it are a little bit different. And I should mention, this session is going to be much less structured than our last session. So last session, I played a video and we kind of, all went through it together. And this session, I'm going to go through the steps and then just wait to see what questions people have and kind of tackle problems as people encounter them. Once you have your environment set up, then you don't need to stick around. You can go ahead and log off, because I will be going over what to do in between now and the next boot camps right now. So let me go ahead. And so I can see that we're definitely going to start with Windows. But before I get to that, I want to talk a little bit about what you can do once you have AlgoKit installed before our next boot camps. So our next boot camp is going to be 2 weeks from now. So you basically have all of next week to kind of play around with AlgoKit and learn a little bit about it before you get your boot camps. And the best way to do that, actually, let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. And the best way to do that is the Algorand coding challenges. So let me actually copy this link here. Sorry for the mirror here. So if you go to github.com/Algorand-coding-challenges, you will get presented with this organization that has Algorand coding challenges laid out for you. And right now, we have a Python challenge live. So you see how it basically works is you come to Algorand coding challenges, and here we have a description of the coding challenges. And the important thing that you guys should know is that each challenge has 14 days where you can complete the challenge and submit a PR. And if you successfully complete the challenge, you get an NFT. Now, so shout out to Sarah Jane here. This is what Camilo was talking about by generating hype. Once you get your NFT from the coding challenge, make sure you share it on Twitter. And you can see here, this is the NFT that you will be receiving when you complete our first coding challenges. And we're going to have multiple coding challenges, each with their own unique badge. And as you can see, this is a really cool NFT developed by an artist named Mars that is in the Algorand ecosystem. So going to the challenge is not only a good way to get started with AlgoKit and learn a little bit about Python, but also a great way to get these cool NFTs. So coming back to the coding challenges, the first challenge that is live now that you'll be able to complete even before the bootcamp is if you click on the link to Python Challenge 1, and this has a README talking about how you can get started running this project and start debugging some of the errors in it. Now, if you find this a little bit too difficult, don't worry. We're going to be covering all these concepts in the beginner as well. But this is a fun way to challenge yourself before the beginner bootcamp and to get started with AlgoKit. So I'm not going to be going too in depth into the challenge now. Just wanted to point you guys to this challenge if you're looking for something to do next week while you're waiting for the beginner bootcamp. So with that out of the way, let me stop sharing my screen. And we can now get a little bit into how we can start setting up our development environment. Before I do that, I notice we have a couple of questions. So first is asking for jobs on Algorand. I believe we do have, let me see if this link still works. Yeah, so we do have this link. So for jobs on Algorand, if you go to jobs.algorand.foundation, that has a listing of all the jobs at the Algorand Foundation and also some job listings in the ecosystem. However, I will say if you are a developer and you're looking for a job, the best way to get a job, really, this not only applies to Algorand, but kind of any open source ecosystem, the best way to find a job in the ecosystem is to get active in communities like Discord and Twitter and start engaging with other developers, other projects, and so that they know who you are and you know who they are. And so when they are looking for a developer, they will kind of know you and come to you and be able to reach out with opportunities. So you can go to jobs.algorand.foundation and see some of the listings now. But the best way to get a job in this ecosystem is to start participating in the community sooner rather than later. And that's actually how I ended up getting a job at the foundation. Is I was active in the Discord, answering questions, and that eventually led that to being my full-time job. And we also see a question about recordings. Camilla just answered it, but yes, there will be recordings. So if you do not have availability during the live session, or you have to skip out on the second half, the full live session that we do today and for all of our future boot camps will be recorded, and that recording will be sent to you automatically via email after the session ends. And we have a question about, is it a PLAS, the certificate for, I assume they're talking about the certificate for this bootcamp. I believe it is applause.
Yeah, Joe, it's applause, but with the new verifiable credential functionality that allows you to add this to your LinkedIn profile and also verify that we are minting this certificate for you.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. So it is a applause. And for those that don't know, a applause is similar to like Ethereum's POAPs, and it's an NFT that's associated with a specific event. And as Camilo said, we are using standards like verified credentials, so you can even add it to your LinkedIn so people can see that you attended the bootcamp. Okay. And so I see if you didn't get the session 1 via email, Camilo, maybe if you can get the link and post it to that question, you should be getting emails. I would definitely check your spam, because if it's going to the spam, you definitely wouldn't see it then, of course. And add the Livestorm URL to your approved senders in your email client. But it should be available. I actually think if you go to the link that you used to join last session, I think it'll bring you to the recording. I might be wrong on that, so but we'll work on getting the link to you guys. And a question about if we can run it offline. So yes, once we installed all the dependencies, of course, we need dependencies for, or we need an internet connection to install the software. But once you've installed all the software, you don't need an internet connection. So on Algorand, our development experience is focused on a local network running on your local machine. So you don't need to connect to an external testnet or mainnet or anything to develop on Algorand. Okay, and we see this question about Docker. We'll get to this in a second. This seems like a problem with how Docker was installed. So when we start talking about Docker, you can make sure that you've gone through all the installation steps, and then we can come back and see if we can figure out this problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is, let me think about the best way to do this. Yeah, actually, I'll just share this tab. Give me 1 second to share my screen here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the installation steps. I'm going to start with Windows, and then I'll cover Mac as well. And I will say real quickly for Mac, if you are on Mac, you can install Brew. So if you go to brew.sh, you can install Brew and all the dependencies we need. So Git, Docker, Visual Studio, and Python are all available on Brew. So if you're familiar with Brew, you can probably get started right away. But like I said, I'm going to be starting with Windows. And I should mention other resources. So if we go through this recording and you're still having trouble setting up your development environment, of course, you can come to our Discord server, that's discord.gg/Algorand, and ask questions there. But we also have this resource page on our developer portal. And this page is this page here. And this is the AlgoKit This is the AlgoKit Quick Start Guide. And on here, we have a quick video showing you how to get started with AlgoKit, all of the prerequisites that are required, and then installation steps for all of our supported operating systems. So, and also on here, so you can see here, there's videos for development environment setup on Windows and development environment setup on Mac OS. And if you want to get to these, you go to the link, or if you go to youtube.com/@algodevs, come over to playlists, and down here in Algorand environment setup, we have all these videos for the intro, installing on Windows, and installing on Mac. So these are good resources you can use after the bootcamp if you're still having some problems. And of course, you can just reach out to us directly. Now, as I mentioned, there's a couple of different requirements for installing, and you can see the list right here on this developer portal page. Make this even bigger here. And so I'm going to be going through how we can install all of these. Now, the order in which you install them doesn't really matter. You have to do Python before pipX and AlgoKit, but everything else you can install in any order. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be starting with the thing that takes the longest to install. So that way, if you don't have it yet installed, I can continue on and other people can catch up, and then we can come back. Like I said, this session is going to be very open-ended. So if you have questions throughout the session, definitely let us know and we'll try to answer them. I'll be periodically checking back here on the questions tab. And again, as a reminder, so in your Livestorm session, you should be seeing the chat tab and the questions tab. If you have a question tab, if you have a question, definitely come to the questions tab rather than the chat. The questions tab is what I'll be keeping an eye on as we go throughout this session. Okay. So question, should we create a virtual environment for AlgoKit? The recommended way to install AlgoKit is to use pipX. So pipX will automatically handle creating the virtual environment for you. If you don't want to use pipX, it is recommended installing a virtual environment so you don't have dependencies clashing with other projects. But we will get to that specifics in a little bit here. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to get started with installing Docker. Now, for pretty much every piece of software, there are multiple different ways you can install it. I'm going to be recommending kind of the official ways from the first party download links for installing Docker. And so on Windows, Docker for Windows, we can use this page here to install Docker. And as you can see here, this Docker page lists some requirements. Now, and what we want is Docker Desktop. We want to make sure on Windows and Mac, we have Docker Desktop. On Linux, it's probably more common to not use Docker Desktop. But again, if you're on Linux, you can probably navigate yourself around the Docker installation yourself. But if not, you can come to our Discord and ask questions. So this is the page that goes over installing Docker Desktop on Windows. And you'll see here at the system requirements, all of the requirements for the system that you have. So there are two ways to install Docker, to run Docker on Windows. You can use the WSL2 backend or the Hyper-V backend. Now, we recommend using the WSL2 backend. And for those that don't know, WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. And this basically means on Windows, you're running Linux in the background in order to power Docker. So this is the recommended way that we install, that we recommend installing Docker. If you already have Hyper-V set up and you're familiar with Hyper-V and how to use Windows containers, then you can go ahead and do that. But for the sake of today, and for most people, we're going to be wanting to use WSL. Now, if you don't have WSL, what you want to do is click on this link here. We can open up the Microsoft documentation, and you can see here all the prerequisites for WSL. And in order to check if you have WSL, in your terminal, you can run the WSL command. And if you don't have it yet, you'll need to run WSL install. And as you can see here in this note page, this has all the information about all the different scenarios in which WSL may or may not be installed. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Okay, so installing WSL, put this up here, might take a little bit. I think on newer versions of Windows, WSL comes installed out of the box. And if you want to double check if you're compatible, you can see here on the Docker page the recommended OS version. So you can see here it supports Windows 11 64-bit, Home or Pro, 2021 H2 or higher. Okay, and of course it also works with enterprise or education versions. And for Windows 10, so if you don't have Windows 11 and you have Windows 10, you want to make sure you're on 2022 H2, build 19045. And this is the recommended version. However, you need at least 21H2 19044. Okay. And if you're not sure what version you have, if you already have Windows installed and you've been updating your Windows, you are probably on the correct version. And if you can install WSL, then you're probably good to go. And so what you're going to do is you install WSL2 with the Ubuntu backend, and that'll get you set up for installing Docker. Now, once you have WSL set up, you can see here how we can actually download Docker. So the recommended way, it's a little bit easier to install interactively. So you can see at the top of the download page is the installer. So if I come here, click on Docker Desktop for Windows, that's going to download the exe. And you simply install Docker Desktop. And you want to make sure that you use WSL2 instead of Hyper-V. And then once you have Docker Desktop installed, now I'm on Mac, so it's going to look a little bit different. But once you have Docker Desktop installed, oh, actually, I just realized I'm not sharing my screen. So let me open up Docker and I'll show you what it should look like. Give me 1 second. Okay, for some reason, my Docker Desktop isn't wanting to open. So let me go see if they have a picture of what it, okay, yeah. So once you have Docker Desktop installed, if you search for it in your search bar, you should see this Docker Desktop app. And from there, you should be able to open Docker Desktop. And by default, you won't have any containers running. It should prompt you if you want to set up a Hello World container. You can go ahead and do that, but we're going to be running our first containers when we start installing AlgoKit. So those are the installation steps for Docker. Now, as I mentioned, setting all this up is going to take a bit, especially if you have to install WSL2. So what I'll do is I'll come check our questions. And, oh, I just realized, oops, I had that question up the whole time. Sorry about that. So will you be able to install after the session? Yes. These resources are all going to be available to you after the session as well. And you can follow along with either this recording, or you can go to our quick start guide and follow along the steps there. And in terms of courses right now, if you don't, if you aren't already subscribed to our future boot camps, make sure you do so. Those are the official courses for learning Algorand. Right now, these are conducted as live sessions, but we also post the content on YouTube later. So right now, like we did in our first intro session, I go through the content, I play a recording of the video, and then I pause the video and answer questions live. On YouTube later, we're going to be posting the video uninterrupted. So if you prefer learning at your own pace and don't want to go to the live sessions, it will also be available on YouTube. But we recommend going to the live boot camps because that's where you can get your answered questions answered live, and also, most importantly, get that cool certificate that we showed at the beginning of the course. So even if you're unsure, I definitely recommend registering for the boot camps. And that's great to hear. Yes, we are trying to make this approachable for every developer, whether or not you are new to Web3 or not. So definitely let us know if you encounter any problems, and we will try to help. And one last question here before we continue on. We do need Python 3.12. I believe for AlgoKit itself, we need 3.10. But for developing contracts with Python on Algorand, we need 3.12. And I'll be showing the steps on how we install 3.12 in just a second. So if you don't have 3.12, yes, you will need to support 3.12. And this is a great question. So we've talked about how we have Python integration, or Python support, I should say. And we'll be learning a little bit more what this looks like in our beginner Python bootcamp. But it's important to know that while the contracts are written in native Python, we don't yet support native Python libraries. So the frameworks that you can use for Algorand contracts and for regular Python apps are going to be a bit different. But as time goes on, we're going to be adding more and more support for more common Python frameworks. So to start, we're going to be having a unique Algorand framework, but in the future, we'll be adding support for more frameworks and libraries as the Python Algorand library matures. And if you already have containers running, there is no need to stop them. Once we get to installing AlgoKit, AlgoKit will manage your containers for you. So you don't have to worry about manually setting up your containers. And if you're brand new to Docker, you don't have to do anything directly in Docker Desktop. You just want to make sure that you open it to make sure that Docker is actually installed. So once you verify that Docker is actually installed, you don't have to do anything else with it. AlgoKit will do everything else for you. So don't worry about doing stuff with Docker yourself. Okay, so I'm going to go on. I recognize that if you came into this without WSL installed, then you probably don't have it yet installed because I think it's like a gigabyte to install WSL and then Docker. So, and you have to restart your computer as well. So I recognize the fact that you might not yet be ready to continue the next step if you're watching this live. However, I'm going to continue on to the next steps. So for those that do have Docker already installed, they can continue on to the next step. And if you want to get caught up later, you can come back to the recording and follow along, or again, come back to the quick start guide and follow along there. But now I'm going to assume that we have Docker and WSL installed, and you can open up Docker Desktop and it works. And we don't have to manually run any containers yet, so don't worry about doing anything with Docker. We just want to make sure it's installed. And once we have Docker installed, the next thing we want to install is Git. Now, if you're already a developer, whether Web3 or not, you probably have Git installed. For those that don't know, Git is a command line tool and a very common command line tool at that for managing repositories of code, particularly managing versions of code. And this is going to be essential as a developer whenever you're making your code public or collaborating with other developers, you want to have Git installed. And there are some core features of AlgoKit that depend on Git. Now, the nice thing is that Git is very easy to install on Windows. If you come to the Git download page, and you can see here the URL, gitcsm.com/download/win. Let me go ahead and post this in the chat. And yes, I see in the chat, if you install Docker before WSL, that's fine. You just have to make sure that you install WSL as well. Otherwise, Docker won't be able to run unless you also set up Hyper-V. But again, we recommend setting up WSL. So the next step is making sure you have Git installed. And so the easiest way is if you just come to this page and on downloads, you can click here to download Git for Windows, and that'll download an exe. Or you can also use the winget tool. So if you do a winget install id git.git e source winget, you will install the latest version of Git. Winget, if we see this here, is a tool provided for you in Windows. So later versions of Windows will have winget installed, but not every version of Windows will have it installed. So it might just be easier to do the click here to download and install Git. And once you install Git, you should be able to, in your search bar, if you search Git for, or I think it's bash for Git, I think it's called, on Windows, you'll be able to open up a terminal that has Git ready for you. And in order to make sure you have it installed, let me stop sharing my screen and give me 1 second to open up a new tab and share my screen. Give me 1 second. Come back here and share. I'll just share my entire screen actually. Okay, so if I share my screen, in order to make sure you have Git installed, if you open up a terminal, and we'll install VS Code next. So if you don't have VS Code installed, don't worry. We'll go over that in a second. You should be able to do a git -- version. The exact version of Git doesn't really matter. You definitely want probably something 2.0 or later, but beyond that, it shouldn't really matter. But you can see here that we have Git installed, and that is exactly what we want. And now let me go ahead and share back my browser window again. And once we have Git installed, again, much like Docker, we don't need to do anything with Git directly right now. It's just a prerequisite for getting AlgoKit installed. Now, the next thing we want to do, once you actually, let me check to see if we have questions. This would be news to me. As far as I know, there's no plans to discontinue VS Code. And even if there was, VS Code is open source. So if Microsoft were to stop working on it, it would still be continued to work on by the open source community. So don't worry. As far as I know, VS Code is going to be sticking around. And even if you don't like VS Code and you prefer another IDE like JetBrains, for example, we also support JetBrains like PyCharm, and what's the WebStorm, I think it's called, as well in AlgoKit. So JetBrains IDEs are supported as well. So if you don't want to use VS Code, you don't have to, but that's what we're going to be going over today. We got a question about TypeScript and Python. So yeah, the Python compiler is a little bit slower than TypeScript. So if you've tried both and you notice that Python is slower, it's nothing wrong on your machine. It's just the way that Python was built. In the future, we will be optimizing the compiler so it'll run faster. But right now, if you're seeing slightly longer compiler times, like it should be like a couple seconds at most, then that's expected. If it's taking like 30 seconds or a minute, then that's probably something a little bit wrong. And we can, the best way to kind of debug that is to come to our Discord. So discord.gg/Algorand, and you can post there to get some support. Also, I see this question: can the application be installed on phone? No, right now these local development environment setups cannot be installed on a phone or a tablet because we need Docker. However, if you are on a phone or a tablet and you would like to develop on it, you can continue to use code spaces like we did in our intro session to have an environment in the cloud for you. However, we recommend setting up a local environment so you don't have to worry about running out of free time, because on GitHub code spaces, you only have like, I think it's 50 hours per month for free. So if you don't want to have to worry about that, then we recommend installing locally. And so that's what we're going to be covering today. And let me put the link to the Discord here, discord.gg/Algorand. Okay. So once you have Git installed, we can go ahead and continue on to, actually, let me go over Python first. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install Python. So let me copy this Python link here. Okay. So someone is saying that they're discontinuing Visual Studio and not VS Code. Again, I don't know much about that, but that would make a little bit more sense. So yeah, don't worry about VS Code. It's not going anywhere. Okay. So there is the Python install link. And the easiest way to install it is if you come to the latest download. So if you come to downloads and then you come to Windows and you do the latest Python release, again, we need Python 3.12. Keep forgetting to make this bigger. Oops. We need Python 3.12. If you already have another version of Python installed, you're going to want to install Python 3.12 or update to Python 3.12. So come to the Python 3.12 page, and if you scroll down here, you can see all these different links, and you can see the recommended Windows install here. It's a exe that is an installer, and that will go ahead and install Python. And during the Windows installation for Python, I'm not on Windows, so unfortunately I can't show this live. But as you go through the installation for Python, at some point, there will be a question about whether you want to add Python to your path. So it will be uppercase PATH. You want to make sure that that is clicked. If you don't have Python installed to your path, AlgoKit might have a little bit of trouble finding Python. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a second to install that. Okay, so we got some questions. So do you need to install Python 3.12 on Windows or WSL? You need to be installing Python on Windows itself. This is assuming you prefer developing on Windows. So if you plan on running VS Code on Windows and developing natively on Windows, then you need to have Python installed on Windows. If you prefer to connect to WSL and do all your development in the Windows subsystem for Linux, then you can install it in WSL. But if you're a Windows user and you prefer running your applications and development dependencies in Windows, you need to have Python 3.12 installed. So basically, you need 3.12 installed on the machine that you're going to be developing on. So which operating system is going to have your project directories? And that's where you're going to install Python 3.12. And we'll be getting to Mac in just a bit. There are a couple different ways that we can go about it. The easiest is using Brew. So I'll be showing you how we can use Brew to install a specific version of Python in a little bit. But I just want to wrap up our Windows section here. Yeah, so if you already have a version of Python installed, I recommend uninstalling your current version. However, I believe if you run, so let's say you have Python 3.10 installed and you run the 3.12 installer, that should update your system to now use Python 3.12 by default. But if you want to make sure that you aren't having dependencies clash, then I recommend uninstalling the previous version just to be safe. Yeah, so in today's session, we're mostly just going to be going over installing dependencies. At the very end, I will be going over some basic AlgoKit commands, but we will be covering them again in the beginner Python bootcamp. So if you are already set up on all your dependencies, so you have Docker installed, you have Python installed, you have AlgoKit installed, and you can run in a local net with AlgoKit local net start, then you don't need to stick around. You can just come back to the beginner bootcamp where we'll pick up assuming that you have everything installed already. And of course, in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can ask in our Discord. Can we install Python in a virtual environment? Yeah, certainly. So in just a little bit, we'll be going over how to set up, how to actually install AlgoKit. And so when we get to that point, you can do that in a virtual environment. So if you prefer using something like VM or PyEnv to set up virtual environments, you can certainly go ahead and do that. But I'm going to be explicitly talk about how we install it regularly without a virtual environment. But if you're already familiar with Python and how to use virtual environments, then you can certainly use it. AlgoKit will work just fine in a virtual environment. Okay, So at this point, we should hopefully have Docker, Git, and Python installed. And before we check our versions for Python, let's talk a little bit about VSCode. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And again, the easiest way to install VSCode is if we come to code.visualstudio.com/download. Let me put this link in the chat. And coming back to VS Code, you should just be able to do the big download button for whatever system you're on. If you're on Mac, you can also install it using Brew, which I'll get to in just a second. But installing VS Code should be fairly straightforward. You click the download, and it should download, and it'll give you some information about VS Code as well here if you're new to VS Code. But you download for Windows, you download the exe, you run it, and then you should be able to open it. And once you have VS Code installed, we can go ahead and let me stop sharing and share my VS Code window. Yes, Camilo makes a good point. If even if you have all your dependencies installed, make sure you stick around at the end of the session so you can get your certificate for attending the intro bootcamp. Okay, so let me go ahead. And once you have VS Code installed, you can open it up, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to open up a new terminal. And so I think on Windows, you will have a like a hamburger menu in the top left where you can drop down and go to terminal and select new terminal. And here in the terminal is where we're going to make sure we have all our dependencies set up and we can begin the AlgoKit process. So we're going to run first git this dash version to make sure we have Git installed, and then a Python dash version to make sure we have Python 3.12 or greater. Now, I saw some people saying that they installed Python 3.12, but when they run Python dash version, they're still getting 3.11 or some other version. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. On Windows, what you might have to do is you might have to double check and see if you need to run py dash version. It's not going to work for me on Mac, but this is another command that you can use to check your version. And if you're getting different versions of that, so if you get one version with Python, if you get Python 3.11 with Python, Python 3.12 with py, then now you know in your future, you just need to be using py for the commands that we go over. So at this point, we have VS Code installed, we have our Python, and we have our Git installed. Now, before I go into installing AlgoKit itself, because the next steps are going to be the same on both Mac and Windows, let me go over the Mac installation steps as well. And I see in the question in the chat if you always need to run a local net. And yes, when you're developing, by default, we recommend developing against a local net. There are ways to develop against a public network like a test net, or we also have a beta net or a main net. However, the recommended way we recommend developing is through a local net. And we'll get into the exact benefits of this at the end of today's session. But quick summary is that local net doesn't require internet connection, and all the blocks are instantaneous. So you can do testing much quicker with local net. And if you're having problems installing pipX, I'll get to that in just a moment. I'm going to go through the Mac steps first to get all the prerequisites, and then I'll go over installing pipX and AlgoKit, which they're the same on Mac and Windows. And no, you do not need a funded Algo wallet in order to claim the certificate, there will be an option to, actually, I might be incorrect. You might need, I think you need a wallet, but you don't need Algo. So when we get to the claim step, we'll go over the exact details of how we can do this. But Plausible does offer options for claiming it without a funded wallet. You might just need a temporary wallet in the meantime. Okay. So let me quickly go over the Mac installation steps. Mac, it's a little bit more straightforward because we can just use Brew for everything. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Window. Now, one thing I will mention on Mac is you want to make sure you have Xcode installed. So actually, let me go to, so if you go to the App Store on your Mac, you want to make sure that you have Xcode installed. This might take a little bit to install. It's a fairly big install, but unfortunately, it's kind of required for a lot of development-related things on Mac. So you're going to make sure you install Xcode. The nice thing is that we don't need any sort of like WSL-like thing because Docker is natively supported on Mac. So everything else after you install Xcode can be done through Brew, and it's pretty simple. If you don't have Brew installed yet, let me link here. Actually, I'm curious. Okay, so only about 20%. Okay, so I will try to go through this relatively quick so we can get all caught up. But like I said, on Mac, we can use Brew for pretty much all of our installation steps. And this makes installing rather easy. Now, if you're already a developer on a Mac, you probably have Brew installed. But if not, you come to brew.sh and you just simply copy this command and run it in your terminal in order to install Brew. Now, once you have Brew installed, you'll be able to install all of our requirements. So for example, in order to install Docker, you just do a, let me make this bigger. To install Docker, you do a brew install cask Docker. To install Git, brew install Git. To install Visual Studio, you do brew install cask Visual Studio code. And to install Python, you do a brew install Python 3.12. Now, this is the important step that someone was asking. If I already have Python installed and it's not 3.12, how do I update to Python 3.12? What you want to do is make sure you run brew install Python at 3.12. So let me go ahead and share my VS Code windows again. Actually, let me answer, before we do that, let me answer a couple of questions. So do you have to install both pip and AlgoKit? You don't necessarily need pipX for installing AlgoKit. But what pipX does is it separates the installation for AlgoKit from the rest of your dependencies. So that way there, you don't accidentally install something that messes up your AlgoKit install. So we recommend using both pipX, or we recommend using pipX to install AlgoKit. It's not required, but I'll be going over the steps how we do that in just a minute here. And do we also need to install a TypeScript development environment? For right now, no. Eventually, when we get to the front end, you will need to install Node, but we'll be going over that in the beginner bootcamp, so we don't have to worry about that for now. Okay, so let me go ahead. And actually, I did get a question. Okay, so I see here, so the joys of developing on Windows. So I see here that Py-dash version gave 3.11.4, Python version gave 3.10.3, and Python 3 version gave 3.11.9. So what I'd recommend doing is on Windows, actually, let me see if I can get, give me 1 second. I'm just trying to find a, okay. So if you're, am I sharing my screen? No, I'm not. Okay, so let me, not done answering that, but let me close that out and then let me share my screen again. And unfortunately, I don't have a Windows machine, and I generally don't do Windows development, so I'm not the best source of information, but let me copy this Stack Overflow page here in the chat. So how to completely remove Python from a Windows machine. It looks like the recommended way is open up your control panel, uninstall program, and find Python. But it looks like that might not be all you need to do. So what you want to do is you want to find your Python exe in your Windows installation directory and delete the exes manually. And again, like I said, I am not on Windows, so I can't directly help with the steps myself. However, if you come to the Stack Overflow page and you're still having trouble installing the correct version of Python, come over to our Discord. I have some colleagues that are much more familiar with Windows and Python that will be able to help you better. So again, let me post this link, discord.gg/Algorand, and make sure you have joined the Algorand Discord, and then you can ask your Windows specific questions there, and someone that's more familiar with Windows will be able to help you out there. So sorry if we weren't able to solve it here, but we should definitely get you in shape for the beginner Python bootcamp starting 2 weeks from now. Okay. So let me go back and for Brew, show a little bit what that looks like. So if I come back here, so again, what we can do is if we just do a brew install cast Docker, we can just run it like that. And what that will do is install Docker for us. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to go ahead and do it. I guess it's in the background. And so once we have Docker installed, we can then install Git via brew install Git. And then we can do brew install Visual Studio Code if you don't yet already have it installed. And then finally, brew install Python 3.12. Now, if you are still running into issues, so if you do a Python -- version, if you're still running into issues, then you want to make sure that you might have other versions of Python installed with brew. So I forget the command, give me 1 second. All right, so if we come back and we do brew list grep Python, you can see here all the versions of Python that you have installed. And if it's still giving you problems, you can try uninstalling these other versions of Python. So for example, if I wanted to do brew uninstall Python 3.9, I could go ahead and do that, and I'll get rid of Python 3.9. So if you're having problems with that, you can check that. One other useful thing that would be useful is running this command which Python. Now, the output for my Python command is actually going to be a bit different than it will be for you. I personally use ASDF to manage all of my developer tooling. So you can see here that it links to my ASDF. But if you do a which Python, it'll tell you where the Python that you're connecting to is installed. And that should give you a better hint of if you're not getting version 3.12, of which version it's actually pointing to you. And doing a which Python will give you the directory to where your current Python is installed, which might help you uninstall it. Okay, so at this point, everyone should hopefully have Python 3.12 installed in Docker and everything ready to go. The next couple of steps are going to be the same on both Windows and Mac. Well, let me go ahead and see. We don't have any more questions, so I think we are all good. So we can go on to now the final steps of how we actually install AlgoKit, and then I'll briefly show you some of the things that AlgoKit can do and how to make sure that it's running properly. So once we have Python installed, actually, what we're going to do is run pip install pipX. Now, again, as I mentioned, you don't need pipX to do this, but it's highly recommended and the recommended way to install AlgoKit to make sure that it doesn't conflict with other project dependencies. So we're going to do a pip install pipX. Now, for me, I already have it installed. So actually, I can probably just show you. Actually, I'm not going to bother uninstalling because that might mess up my paths. But do a pip install pipX. That should work. However, if you're on Windows, what you might need to do is run Python or py -m pip and then install pipX. And this is going to be making sure that you run pipX for the correct version. So if you have multiple versions of Python installed and you have Python 3.12 in your -- version and trying to install AlgoKit tries to install it to a different version, just do Python -m pip install pipX. And once that runs, you should now be able to run pipX -- version. However, you also want to make sure you run pipX ensure path. And this is going to make sure that pipX is installing binaries to your default path. So again, the commands we ran are pip install pipX or Python -m pip install pipX. And then once we have that, we're going to do a pipX version. And once we make sure we have pipX installed, we do a pipX ensure path. Okay, so at this point, we should have Python 3.12 and pipX version. I think this is the latest version 1.3. Should be around version 1.3, maybe a little bit higher or lower. That should be fine. The exact version of pipX doesn't matter, and it's not nearly as important as a version of Python. Okay. Once we have pipX installed, we can now use it to install AlgoKit. Actually, I think I already have it installed, so let me uninstall it first. So to install AlgoKit, all we need to do is pipX install AlgoKit. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a virtual environment for AlgoKit and install all the dependencies that it needs to run. And so we can now see, you want to make sure that you have AlgoKit. Right now, the latest version is 2.02. You want to make sure you have at least AlgoKit version 2.0. this is the version we're going to be using in our bootcamps. So make sure you have 2.0 installed. Now, once we have AlgoKit installed, we want to make sure it's installed correctly by running the command AlgoKit doctor. So this might take a second to run. That's expected. But you can see here, this will tell us all of the different versions and different things that we need to know about our installation environment. And this tells us everything that we've gone through today. So we can see here, we've installed AlgoKit. We have 3.12.0. And this is important because it will tell you which version of Python AlgoKit is installed on. We can see we have Docker installed, which includes Docker Compose. We can see we have Git. And then, of course, our Python and Python 3 commands. We have our pipX and this poetry stuff. This poetry node npm is not required. We'll get to that in our bootcamp. And brew is also not required, particularly if you're on Windows. You don't need to worry about that. So the main things you want to make sure is that you have AlgoKit 2.0. You're seeing Python 3.12, and you're seeing your version of Docker installed. At that point, we should be confident in our AlgoKit installation. So let me go ahead and okay, so let's see this area. I got, after installing pipX, found a space in home path. We heavily discourage this due to multiple incompatibilities. Interesting. Okay. So what this is saying is that I'm going to assume that this is Windows. Might be, is my home path? I don't think my home path has a space. No, it doesn't. So we can see, actually, let me go ahead and stop sharing. Let's actually check out the docs and see what this says on this error. So let me share my. Okay, so let's go pipX space in path. Oh, maybe that's an error from Python. Okay, I can't seem to find the docs that. Let me just copy this whole error message. Let's see if we can find some more information on this. But it sounds like, strange. Can't seem to find any information about it. But it sounds like basically what it's saying is that where you've installed Python or pip, or your default path that Python and pipX is trying to use contains a space in it. And so this might cause some problems in other programs when it's trying to, oh, you do say that it is for pipX. So it might cause some programs when installing, it might cause some problems when installing programs with pipX. As far as I know, this isn't a problem with AlgoKit. And let me see here. And yeah, it looks like you are able to change your pipX directories. So, let me share my screen again. Share. So if you come to github.com/pypa/pipX, and in the docs, it looks like there is ways to override the home. So in your Windows path, or if you're on Mac, in your Mac path, your Mac environment, or your Windows or Mac environment variables, you can set your pipX home and pipX binder to separate directories. Because I'm not on Windows, I can't show this, but again, if you need, if it does, so for now, I think you can ignore that warning. It should be fine for AlgoKit. If you do run into issues, then come on over to the Discord and we can help you set up your environment path correctly. Yeah, your environment correctly. Okay, so if you are having problems with Windows finding Python, then okay, it looks like we are getting okay, so it looks like if you're getting Python not found, you want to make sure that you restart your VS Code or terminal that you, so as you can see here, follow up to that question. If you restart your VS Code or the terminal where you're running your commands after installing AlgoKit, and in particular, after doing pipX ensure path. So let me go ahead and share my VS Code again. So after you have Python 3.12 installed, and then you do a pipX, or excuse me, pip install pipX, and then pipX install AlgoKit. What you want to do is just close your VS Code and make sure it's completely closed. So close any VS Code windows and open them back up. And what that will do is that'll refresh your environment. Oh, actually, I forgot to mention, make sure you run a pipX ensure path. So let me put this, there's, I think the key here is pip install pipX or python-m pip install pipX, and then pipX ensure path, and then pipX install AlgoKit. Okay, so I just put in the chat all these commands, and I'll put them on the screen again. So pipX install AlgoKit, and then pipX ensure path, and then restart VS Code. Okay, so doing all of these steps, and again, pipX ensure path is really the key here, because that'll make sure that the next time you restart your terminal or you restart your VS Code, that it'll be able to find your Python and AlgoKit installations. Okay. And I should mention pip. Let me clear this pip install pipX, pipX install AlgoKit, pipX ensure, and then restart VS Code. Okay. And then finally, AlgoKit doc tour. So I'll leave that up, give it a minute or two to make sure that everyone is caught up on the same page. And then we can continue on and learn a little bit about AlgoKit. But if you're able to get this far, you're like 90% of the way there. And if we can't figure it out, any problems, then we can go ahead and let me see if I can make this a little bit. Yeah, if I make it a little bit bigger, it kind of cuts off. So I don't know if there's a way. Can I make this smaller? I can't seem to make it any bigger. Sorry about that. But I put in the chat the commands, so pipX or pip install pipX, pipX ensure path, and pipX install AlgoKit. And if you're running into Python not found when you're running Docker, you want to make sure that you have sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. If you're installing AlgoKit, you want to make sure you run AlgoKit Docker and you have everything installed and ready to go. Okay, so if you're getting pip not recognized, what you're going to want to do then is Python -m pip install pipX. Okay, so if you're getting errors trying to run pip directly, do a Python -m pip. So if you just use pip to install pipX, that is fine. It will, that is totally fine. It will install, but the difference between pip and pipX is that pipX installs installs all the dependencies in its own environment. So this means like AlgoKit requires a bunch of different Python libraries in order to run. If you try to run some other project that maybe requires different versions of those dependencies, then you're going to get a bunch of dependency conflicts between AlgoKit and your project. So using pipX protects you from having to manage those dependencies manually. If you want to install it with pip, that's totally fine, but you might run into some errors if you're doing that. Yeah, let me run a AlgoKit Doctor and I'll paste it in chat. Now, again, the exact output is going to be different for everyone. And for me, I'm personally on Mac. So my AlgoKit Doctor is going to look different than yours. And it's okay if yours looks a little bit different. The key is that you can see a Docker version, you can see a Git version, and you can see a Python version, and it is 3.12 or higher. So yes, when you do a pipX install, this is another benefit of pipX, is that by default, pipX will put it in your path if you have your paths on Windows set up. Depending on your paths in Windows, it might give you a little bit of trouble. So if you're having problems with it getting added to your path, come to our Discord and we'll be able to debug your issues personally. But using pipX to install AlgoKit will ensure that we have AlgoKit installed. Okay, and one last thing to try is if you are, okay, so we can see, okay, so one last thing to try, and I do see a question in the chat, I'll come to that in a second, but if you're getting Python still not be recognized, you can try using just py, so py-m pip install pipX, and doing this, if you can't seem to Python, you can try that and see if that works as well. Okay. Yes, and thank you, Camilo, for that link for the resources on adding Python to Path in Windows. I believe when you do the installation, that this was the checkbox that I'm talking about. When you do an install of Python, it'll ask you if you want to add the path. If you don't do it, then you'll need to go back and make sure you've added to your path. And yes, I do drink a lot of water, so I do have quite a big water bottle. Okay, let's see. I think you've answered a lot of the key questions. So what I'm going to do now, so even if you don't, if you're still running into problems, we can come back and either debug a bit more on the live storm, or we can help you out on Discord after the fact. What I'm going to do now is just show you some basic commands that you can run to make sure that everything is working, and talk a little bit about the things AlgoKit has to offer. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll go through over the certificate, and then I'll stick around. If anyone else has any problems, we can try to debug further. But I'm going to continue on for those that are ready to and have AlgoKit installed and ready to go. So let me come back to my VS Code window here. So again, now that we verified that we have AlgoKit installed, we can start exploring some of the command line options that AlgoKit has to offer. So actually, give me 1 second. Let me just reset my local environment so we can follow along together here. Okay. So once we've run AlgoKit Docker and we see that we have Docker in our Python 3.12 and Git and everything installed, we can go ahead and start running our first AlgoKit commands. So in general, if we run just AlgoKit, you can see here all the different commands that AlgoKit has to offer. We've already explored a little bit with Docker, but you can see there are all these other commands. Now, the first command we're going to run to make sure that everything is installed correctly is this localnet command. And generally, when you want to know more information about a command, you just run AlgoKit, that command, and then I'll tell you information. And so what we're going to be doing is running the AlgoKit localnet command. AlgoKit localnet is how we manage Docker to set up that local instance of our development environment, or the local instance of our blockchain. So what I'm going to do is AlgoKit localnet start. Now, if this is your first time, actually, I'm going to do AlgoKit localnet reset, just so we can front clean. So the first time you do a AlgoKit localnet start, so let me come back here, AlgoKit localnet start. Sorry about those commands. Do an AlgoKit localnet start. It's going to pull a bunch of images from Docker. And this is what I was talking about, where AlgoKit is going to do all the management of Docker for you. So it's going to pull an indexer database image and a AlgoKit sandbox image. You can see here, there's an AlgoD, an indexer, and a Postgres. We're going to be going over all these different pieces in the beginner bootcamp, so don't worry about that for now. But once that command is successfully run, if you run an AlgoKit localnet status, we should see here that we have our own localnet running. Okay, and if we can get to the point where we run a AlgoKit localnet start and AlgoKit localnet status, and we see that the status is running, congratulations, you've installed everything that you need to get AlgoKit up and running. Now, a couple other things to mention real quick is in AlgoKit. Actually, let me just go back and see if there are any more questions. So let me answer this. Yeah, so Again, you don't need to use pipX. You can use pipenv if you want. You can use basically any version manager you want, but the officially supported one is pipX. That's the one we recommend developers to use. But if you're already familiar with pipenv or other environment management stuff, feel free to use that. pipX is not a dependency of AlgoKit. It's just the recommended way we install it. We recommend developers to install it. Okay. And now that we've run our AlgoKit local init status, if you just do an AlgoKit, you can see all of these other commands that you have available to you, and you can begin exploring them to start learning a little bit more about AlgoKit. And as I mentioned, let me just share the link for the Algorand coding challenge. If you go to the Algorand coding challenge that requires you to install AlgoKit, you'll be ready to start the coding challenge. And as you can see in the README for the coding challenges, you'll get started by running a command called bootstrap, doing AlgoKit bootstrap all. And that is going to be how you get started with the coding challenge. So at this point, we have installed all of our dependencies for AlgoKit, and we have ran AlgoKit Doctor to make sure it's finding all of our dependencies. And then we've made sure that we can run an AlgoKit localnet start and then an AlgoKit localnet status to make sure that we have all of our stuff installed and AlgoKit working properly. And so now we can get to the part that you have all been waiting for, and we can get into the certificate and then talk a little bit about the bootcamps that'll be coming up.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. What a great session. One of the most important steps is to have our local environment ready, and for that reason, we decided to cover that during today's session. And sometimes on Windows, you got a lot of errors, but my recommendation is to install everything using WS2. It's a lot of easier, and you will remove the path and all these crazy things that used to happen when you are doing directly with Windows. So, what do you need for claiming the certificate? First, you need a wallet, an Algorand wallet. So in this case, you can use Pera or DeFi. Hold on a second. I share with you the links on the chat. So this one is to download Pera or DeFi. And then I will share with you a QR code. It's important that you scan that QR code with your camera, not with your wallet, because otherwise you will receive an error because you are not scanning a wallet address. This is a QR code that will redirect us to the Go Plausible website. So hold on a second. I can share my screen. Okay, there you go. If you scan that QR code, you will be redirected to the Go Plausible website, and also you can do it using this link. What is the next step? I will present some videos so it's easier for me to show you the process. So over here, I scan the QR code with my camera. Then I will go to the Go Plausible website. I just need to press the Proceed to Claim button. And then you just need to select the wallet that you are going to use. On my case, I select Pera Wallet. You need to launch your wallet and connect one account. Usually, what happened in this step is that you need to go back to your Explorer to continue with the claiming process. So as you can see over here, hold on a second. Over here, I was in my Pera wallet, but then I need to go back to Safari in this case, and then I need to press the claim button. Then you need to launch your Pera wallet again and sign the transaction to receive the NFTs. As you can see in your wallet, you have the NFT gallery, and over there you will have all the NFTs that you buy or you claim. This is gonna be your certificate of completion, but at the beginning I mentioned to you that this is a verifiable credential that you can add to your LinkedIn profile. So how you can do it? Hold on a second, I have another video ready for you, and I hope that in the chat Sarah is going to share with you guys the full video explaining you the process. The QR code, yeah, this is the QR code. Or if you prefer, over here you will have the link that is gonna do the same process. One moment, please. If anyone has any problem claiming the certificate, you can send me an email. I will share with you my email so I can help you after the session. Awesome. So coming back to the video, what do you need to do next? You need to go to the Go Placebo website. So this is the link. With your wallet, you need to scan this QR code. Then you need to connect. You will prompt some message in your cell phone. And then I'm doing over here the connection process. So we need to wait a few seconds. I need to do the opt-in process. I need to sign the transaction. Wait a few seconds. As you can see, all the transactions in Algorand are super fast and super cheap. And once this process is finished, you will see all the certificates that do you have in your wallet. So you need to press the reject claims. Wait a few seconds, and over there you will be able to add the certificate into your LinkedIn profile. So over here is just the process of how you can do it on LinkedIn. And by default, you will have the name of the certificate issued by the Algorand Foundation. You can verify the certificate. Over here, you can add the skills that you learned during this bootcamp. And LinkedIn, by default, allows you to share the news with your network. But this is a funny part. You can remove the default image and you can add the custom image certificate. So in this case, I just add in the image certificate so I can share with all my network and they will feel FOMO for not participating in this bootcamp. So I hope you help us to share your certificates. In 2 weeks, we will have our Python bootcamp. And what we can expect, Joe, for the Python bootcamp? Why I should participate on it?
Yeah, so in the Python bootcamp, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using one of those commands in AlgoKit, and init to start a brand new project in Python. And then we're going to be building a digital marketplace. So we're going to learn how to use Python on Algorand to build a smart contract that can be used for selling tokens. And then we'll not only go over the smart contract, but we'll also show how to test it in Python and then how to take that smart contract that we originally wrote in Python, automatically generate a client in TypeScript, and integrate it into a React front end. So we'll be starting from nothing with just AlgoKit and init and building all the way up to a digital marketplace with a fully integrated test and front end, all using Python for Algorand.
And it's important that if you prefer to use TypeScript, 1 week later, we will have our beginner TypeScript bootcamp covering the same project, but in this case, using TypeScript. So we have content for all the devs, and we invite you to help us to spread the word, to participate, to share screenshots. And those are the things that we want to present during this intro bootcamp. I don't know, Joe, if you want to share anything else with the algo devs that we have over here today.
Yeah, and I do just want to quickly highlight the fact that if you came into the session late, we did push back the beginner Python bootcamp. It was originally scheduled for next week, but it's now going to be April 15th, as you can see on the screen now. But if you can't make it, don't worry. You'll still have access to the recordings as long as you're registered. And as Camilo said, if you prefer TypeScript, we'll have that the following week as well. So definitely stay tuned and join those boot camps. And even if you are already an Algorand developer, I'm sure you'll learn a thing or two new there as well. So, and Camilo, are we going to have another certificate for those boot camps as well?
Yeah, we have a lot of surprises, and for all the people that participate, for example, in the intro bootcamp, beginner Python, and intermediate Python, we are creating a reward strategy for them. So if you claim all the certificate, maybe you will receive some swags, some special things, and yeah, all the bootcamps will have certificates that you can share. You can create your CV using them. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Wonderful. So we invite you to keep asking us on Discord because there are too many things to solve, mainly with Windows, but it's a pleasure to have you here. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you in our beginner bootcamp Python in 1 week.
Thanks, Camilo, and thanks everyone for joining. I'll see you guys later.
Bye.